Great. Thank you again to our presenters for their spectacular presentations. We will now begin our question and answer panel to include all presenters from this morning's sessions. If you haven't had a chance to enter your question into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. And it looks like we've already had quite a few questions roll in. We'll start with some questions that came in addressed to Regie Samuel. First question, Reggie, how can you retrieve submissions that were submitted using a different account?
Great question. If you had a different account and this is an account you still would like to get the submissions from, there are two things you can do. If you do have the person that maybe submitted it before and they can provide you with those XML SPL files, you can then upload it into CDER Direct. But if you're in a situation where you just don't have the files or the person that used to do it for you is no longer accessible, you can send us an email and we can provide you with the zip file, the previously submitted establishment registration zip file, which you can upload into CDER Direct and manage from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. Another question for you, Reggie. Do I understand correctly from your demonstration that a company needs more than one DUNS number?
So in the case of DUNS numbers, you want to think of DUNS numbers as something that is site specific. So if you have a company that has 5 different locations, each of those locations should be assigned, obtain a DUNS number from Dun & Bradstreet. And so yes, if you're a company that has multiple locations, each location will have one DUNS number assigned to it. Thank you.
Right, thanks again for the clarification. We have some more questions that came in addressed to Regie Samuel. When submitting the first establishment registration with a blank FEI, does one need to resubmit when the FEI number is obtained?
Great question. When you register as an establishment for the first time, as I mentioned in my presentation, you won't have an FEI. And I'll make a clarification to the previous question I saw that came in. The DUNS number will need to be obtained from Dun & Bradstreet, and they will assign a DUNS number to the establishment prior to your registration. Once you then submit your registration, your establishment registration, after about 90 days, you will receive the FEI number. Once you receive it, you will need to go back into your establishment registration, enter the FEI number, and submit it. It will not automatically populate into your establishment registration and appear on the DSER's website. For the FEI number to appear on the DSER's website, you will need to update your establishment registration with the assigned FEI number. Thank you.
Thanks again. Another question for you. Are other establishment registration tools such as ESG still effective? Which one should a new registrant use and why?
Keep in mind that CDER Direct is just another avenue for you to be able to easily submit SPL documents to CDER. ESG, or if you used XForms, or if you have a third-party program in which you create the XML documents, you can continue to use those if you'd like. CDER Direct is just another way for you a free option for you to be able to submit establishment registration, labor code requests, and drug listing files to the FDA. So it's entirely up to you which one you would like to choose. If you do choose CDER Direct, you can do that without having to use the other tools for these specific SPL document types.
Right. Thank you again, Reggie. We'll address some questions now that came in for Jose Cabrera. Jose, generally, how much is the workload for the U.S. agent on an annual basis?
That's a very good question, and thank you for that. So in general, the workload for the US agent is really going to be dependent on the drug establishment that they represent. Some U.S. agents may represent one or two drug establishments with only a few requirements to list drugs. And there may be some U.S. agents who have a larger workload of 50 different drug establishments that they are responsible for. So this is really going to be dependent on the actual U.S. agent's workload, depending on the actual establishments that they're working with. Just to keep in mind, your U.S. agent is a representative of your establishment. So this should be somebody who you are able to communicate with within the establishment, someone that you actually know, and preferably someone that you can reach in times of emergencies when we may have a question on your establishment registration, an SPL, drug listing, a labeler code, etc. Thank you.
Thank you for that response as well. I have another question coming in here addressed to Jose Cabrera. Where can we get definitions of business operations? For example, what is a packager that removes primary packaged product from secondary package and places it in a new secondary package or tertiary package? Is this a repacker, labeler, relabeler, or packer?
Thank you again for that question. So we do get a lot of these questions that come in on what is a packager, what is a relabeler. So rather than going through all of these different requirements or the definitions of these, I can provide a link to the CFR where we have a list of all of the definitions defined and written out. And then for those individuals who have further questions, you can always feel free to email us on those actual definitions, and I'll provide that link into our chat here in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. And now we have a question that came in for Dr. Tasneem Hussain. Does a QC laboratory need to register?
Hey, thank you for that question. Yes, generally, and if quality control activities involve testing or determining if product is within specification or for final products, and if this is generally part of the manufacturing process. So yes, QC labs must register their establishment. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for that response. Another question that came in for you, Dr. Hussain. If the update was made in the middle of the year, can a no change be made during the certification window of October to December?
Yes, thank you for that question. Also, if an update is made in the middle of the year, can a no change be made during October? This is generally a no change certification SPL is generally used when there have been no changes made to the data. So if there are any changes made any time of the year, generally you're required to update, in June and December every year. But any changes that have been made can always be made anytime during the year. So you could just send an update using just updating an SPL and resubmitting it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. We now have some questions that came in for Puii Huber. Um, let's see. First question, Puii, if the labeler code was inactivated, do you need to request a new one or ask the FDA to activate the inactivated code?
Thank you for bringing it up. So yes, you can reactivate an inactivated labeler code. If the inactivation was industry initiated, you can reactivate the labeler code by submitting a request using the assigned code and the original set ID. However, if the inactivation was initiated by the FDA, firms will have to email us at eDRLS@fda.hhs.gov for assistance to reactivate an inactivation by the FDA. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. And another question for you related on labeler code inactivation. Do is it that all NDC codes needs to be no longer marketed, meaning delisted? Could you please clarify that?
Yes, another great question. Thank you. Yes, so for a labeler code to be inactivated, all NDCs associated with that labeler code must be discontinued, since they're no longer in the market. So the proper procedure involves 3 steps. The first one would be to discontinue the drug products associated with that labeler code, since the products are no longer in the market. The second step would be to deregister the establishment with the FDA to let us know that the facility is no longer involved in manufacturing or distributing. And the third step would be to inactivate the labeler code. And so, this will ensure that the labeler code and the products that are listed are no longer active in our external databases. Thank you.
Thank you again. Another question for you, Puii, that came in. If the manufacturer is about to run out of NDCs, can the manufacturer get assigned a new labeler code while still having the old labeler code?
Another great question and an important one. So thank you again for bringing this up. So yes, a manufacturer can be assigned a new labeler code if they are about to run out of product codes under their current labeler code. The manufacturer should also apply for a new labeler code only once they've exhausted or are close to exhausting all the available NDCs under the existing labeler code. Also, there are no regulations that prohibit a firm from having multiple labeler codes, especially with the scenario where they run out of NDCs, as long as they accurately report to the FDA and maintain, a complete and correct information with all their products, registration and listing. That way, the products are probably properly tracked and compliance is maintained. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that as well. Another question for you, Dr. Arora. Can you please clarify who's responsible for requesting the labeler code? If my company, say ABC Pharma, has a product, but we're using establishment ZBA to manufacture the finished drug product, is it ABC Pharma's responsibility to request the labeler code, or is it ZBA's responsibility?
Thank you for that question. So a PLD and CMO are both required to obtain a labeler code, as they're both intended to for distribution into U.S. commercial distribution. So it is while they're both required to obtain a labeler code, it is, however, the responsibility of the PLD's listing as well as the CMO's listing belongs to the CMO. However, many times the CMO does use a PLD as their authorized agent for their listings. Thank you.
Thank you again for that response. And now we'll go to some questions that came in for Regie Samuel once again. Regie, I'm unclear about what is meant if a private label company should not register as an establishment. I work for a private label company, and I was guided by the FDA to register as distributes drug products under own private label. Could you clarify that, please?
Yes, thanks, Nora. So we want to keep in mind a couple of words when we're talking about drug registration and listing. When you hear us use the words register, we're talking about establishment registration. We don't use the term registering a product. We use the term listing a product. So please keep in mind when we're talking about establishment registration, those are for firms, as mentioned in 21 CFR 207, that are performing that manufacturing activity. The business operation mentioned this question for distributes drug product under own private label is not a business operation that's valid in an establishment registration. That business operation is applicable to labeler code request SPLs. So a PLD would not register, and we use that word register, as an establishment, but there are listing requirements which would require obtaining a labeler code and listing drug products. So keep those two things separate and those terms separate. That way we'll be able to properly manage your private label distributor operation. Thank you.
Thank you again. Another question for you. For API manufacturers, do you select the qualifiers that may apply to the end users of your products? Are qualifiers required fields?
A great question. For specific business operations such as analysis and API manufacture, the business operation qualifier is not required. We understand that if you're an API manufacturer, you may not know the what the end user will be using the product for. And so in the validation procedure, if you select the business operation of analysis or API manufacture, the operation qualifier is not a required field. Thank you.
Thank you again. Another question addressed to Regie Samuel. Could you please talk about the capability for override when DUNS does not match?
Yes, the DUNS mismatch is a common error we receive that we see firms get in the establishment registration. There are some overridable errors. However, if the error is something in which the DUNS name, the establishment name, or the address doesn't match what's in the Dun & Bradstreet record, generally that is not an overridable error. What will need to occur is that your company will need to contact Dun & Bradstreet to ensure that the information in the DUNS record is accurate. And when you enter the information in CDER Direct, that it matches exactly what's in the DUNS record. Now, if there's some other ongoing issue for that everything matches, there's no characters that are different or special characters included, then it's possible that there could be a manual override granted. But generally, if there's an address or name mismatch because the DUNS record isn't updated, that will need to be updated first. Thank you.
Thank you again as well. One more question for you. Since a private label distributor is not meant to register their facility, does that distributor still need a labeler code for their CMO to list those private label drugs on behalf of the private label distributor on the NDC database?
Yes. When it comes to this, again, the PLD the private label distributor does have listing requirements, as mentioned by Vikas. They need to obtain a labeler code that identifies the private label distributor, and then the products that are being distributed by that PLD need to be listed under that PLD's labeler code. Under the CFR, the listing responsibility does fall to the contract manufacturer to list the drug product under the PLD's labeler code and its own labeler code. However, if the PLD chooses to, they can list the drug product for themselves under their own labeler code. So we have specific questions about that. Feel free to email us, but please keep in mind that the PLD does need to obtain a labeler code and list a drug product, although they do not and should not, if they're solely a PLD, register as a drug establishment. Thank you for that question.
Thank you again for all the information you've shared. We now have a question that came in addressed to Jose Cabrera. How do we find a U.S. agent for our foreign manufacturer?
Thank you for that question. And we do get this question a lot that comes into our mailbox. So, in short, to locate a US agent, it is the responsibility of the foreign manufacturer to locate one. We do not have a list or database of US agents that are able to represent you. That responsibility falls back to the foreign establishment. The recommendation would be to conduct a internet search for US agents in the United States that would be able to represent your establishment in helping you with your establishment registration or SPL documents that you need to send through CDER Direct. Thank you for that question.
And thank you for that response. We have another question for you. Is there a maximum number of establishments that you as a US agent can represent?
Thank you for that question. So, no, there is no amount of, there's not a limit to what a US agent can represent as far as drug establishments. It really would be dependent on that organization and how they represent those foreign establishments. One thing to keep in mind for foreign establishments who are looking for or employing a U.S. agent to represent them, to do their due diligence on that individual and to make sure that this individual is going to be able to conduct the work that they need them to do. For example, if they know they have about 25 to 30 listings per year that they want to have listed, ensure that the U.S. agent that they are communicating with is able to accomplish those in a timely manner. Thank you for that question.
Thank you again for your response. And now we have a question that came in for Laurie Simonds. What happens to a labeler code without any drug listed?
That is a great question. The labeler code would automatically be inactivated after 24 months if there aren't any drugs listed. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. One more question for you. How long do I have before my labeler code information must be updated?
Another great question. Labeler code information, including the name, physical address, email address, and any other contact info, must be updated within 30 days of that change. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that response as well. Now we have another question that came in for Puii Huber once again. Who should request the labeler code? Is it the PLD or the CMO on behalf of the PLD?
Thank you for that question. As Vikas and Regie mentioned earlier too, the CMO has the legal responsibility to request the labeler code and list the product on behalf of the PLD. However, some PLDs do choose to request their own labeler code and list the products themselves, to manage their own NDCs. So if the PLD does not elect to list the product, the CMO must do so, using the PLD's labeler code and NDC. Thank you.
Thank you again for that response. And now a question that came in for Dr. Vikas Arora. Why are there 4 or 5 numbered codes? In which case is there a 4-digit code, and in which case a 5-digit code?
Thank you for that question. It just depends on what labeler code you were assigned by FDA. So the current NDC 10-digit formats are 442, 532, and 541. But just keep in mind with the 5-digit labeler codes, if you were assigned that, once you list in a format, you must stick to that format for any future products that you list. Thank you.
Thank you again for that response too. Now we have another question that came in for Regie Samuel. Our FDA regulatory person left and has all the login information for FDA Direct. We cannot get into the site to change their contact information. What can we do?
Thanks, Nora. So if you have the situation where a former employee had all the login credentials for the CDER Direct account, we understand that happens quite often. You can contact, and the information is also there on the CDER Direct website. You can contact the CDER Direct help desk. That email address is cederdirect@fda.hhs.gov, and let them know your firm's DUNS number or some identifying information for the account, and they will help you recover that account so that you don't lose all of the SPL documents that are in that CDER Direct account you can no longer access. So contact the CDER Direct help desk for any account issues you have, and they'll be a great team to be able to help you obtain that information. Thank you.
Thank you again for all that information. Another question for you. Currently, we have the CDER Direct account, but as FDA changed the platform from CDER Direct to FDA Direct, do we have to create a new account for CDER Direct to perform site registration, or still can we use our current CDER Direct account for access?
Yes, with the new FDA Direct, the way you want to think about it is simply that everything is the same, but we're adding another component within the housing of what's in FDA Direct. So instead of just it being CDER Direct, FDA Direct contains two modules, that is Cosmetics Direct and CDER Direct. As such, all of your information is still the same. You don't need to create a new quote unquote FDA Direct account. Your CDER Direct account will still work, your credentials will still work, and all your information will still be there. So on the user's end, you shouldn't see anything different, except that there is another module for those that have to submit cosmetic information. So you shouldn't have any problem being able to continue to use your CDER Direct account as is. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you for that as well. Another question addressed to you, Regie Samuel. If an establishment name is changed, are all products listed for that facility automatically updated in the system, or do new SPLs need to be submitted for each product to update the establishment name after the establishment registration is updated?
Yes, good question. I'll answer a couple of questions also came in relationship to this, and that is, if your firm's establishment name is updated in the establishment registration, it does not flow through and propagate the other listings associated with this establishment. Therefore, you will need to access those product listings, each product listing, and update the establishment name in each product listing and submit that product listing update. It doesn't happen automatically. Similarly, if you have a establishment registration with multiple establishment names, different names, that's fine. There's a couple of questions I saw where firms are wondering if you need to have multiple establishment registrations simply because the name isn't exactly the same as the other establishment. The validation is not going to look for that. You can have a Regie Samuel company, and you can have Nora company, and you can have Puii company, all in the same establishment registration as long as it's under that same ownership. So, and if you add that information, that only sticks to the establishment registration. It doesn't then flow through to the product listings associated with those establishments. You will need to access the product listings separately and update them appropriately. Thank you, Nora.
Right, thank you again, Regie. Another question for you. When a company acquires a new establishment that has its own establishment registration with different name, is it required to keep them separate?
No, they don't need to keep them separate. They can use the same establishment registration regardless if the names are the same or different.
All right, thank you so much for that clarification as well. Now we have another question that came in for Jose Cabrera. How many U.S. agents can a firm have?
Thank you for that question. So From a drug listing perspective, it is recommended that you have at least one U.S. agent. We do not require you to have more than that. Having one U.S. agent is enough due to the fact that this individual will be dealing with a lot of your confidential drug listing information. So it's recommended to not have too many people having access to these types of SPLs with all of this information. So having one U.S. agent would be recommended from an eDRLS perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. Another question for you, Jose. What does FDA mean by an unauthorized U.S. agent?
So this is a very good question that we do come about from time to time with a lot of our inquiries. So an unauthorized U.S. agent, typically what may happen is, as a foreign drug establishment, you register your facility and you are preparing to have a drug listing. And you may find an individual to list as a U.S. agent. You would need to have this individual's consent in order to have them listed in your establishment registration. Once we contact this information and we ask them if they are in fact your U.S. agent for this establishment, and they say no, you have essentially used an U.S. agent and in an unauthorized manner. So we would then possibly open the case against your establishment for using this individual as a U.S. agent without having their consent. So we encourage you to not go online and you find a U.S. agent that you can use and you can take their information and put it into your establishment registration. Definitely you want to contact this individual or company and find out their process for having them become your U.S. agent and have that in writing, something that it can be provided to the FDA when asked. Thank you for that.
Thank you again for sharing that information as well. And now we have another question that came in for Dr. Vikas Arora. If a company is a CMO and manufactures drug product for a client, and the client has a separate packaging and labeling site, does the CMO need to have a labeler code?
Thank you for that question. As a client is also performing manufacturing activities, that is packaging and labeling, they will also need to obtain a labeler code and are subject to listing requirements under 21 CFR 207. Any and all manufacturing activities beginning at the API phase up until the finished dosage form phase are subject to registration and listing requirements. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again for that response. And so we have some more questions that came in for Regie Samuel, very popular for this Q&A session. So Reggie, are warehouses that store finished drug products or API required to register the establishment? If yes, what operations would they choose if there is no analysis being performed of those materials?
Yeah, a few people had asked this question. So, and I think the person asking this question, you've kind of answered it yourself. We've tried to make it clear through the business operations. As you can see, there's not a warehouse business operation because in our definition in 21 CFR 207, they don't fit what we call an establishment. So in short, if a firm is only storing drug product, there's no handling of the drug product itself. As mentioned in this particular question, I want to be very clear that we're talking about simply storing drug product. There would not be a corresponding business operation. You'd be able to select an establishment registration because that is not a firm that's only storing drug product would not be able to register as an establishment. Now, there may be other requirements in FDA for drug storage of particular drug products that may fall under the wholesale drug distributor or third-party logistics. However, for our purposes, no. The answer is no, they would not register if you're solely storing drug product. Thank you.
Thank you again. Another question for you. If we have updated drug establishments in September, is it necessary to submit annual update again in October to December?
Yes, I saw quite a few of these questions come in, so thanks for asking that, Nora. Let's make this clear since this is coming up right now for all of you that are attending this workshop today. If you submit an establishment registration in September of this year or any month prior to October 1st of this calendar year, your registration is only current through 12/31 of this current calendar year. Therefore, you will need to re-register or renew your registration between October 1st and December 31st of this calendar year in order for your registration to be current through 12/31 or December 31 of the following calendar year. So please keep that in mind. If you submitted your establishment registration on September 30th of this year, it will only be current through December 31 of this year. You will need to go into CDER Direct and renew your registration by clicking on Create New, and then submit that file or submit a no change notification for your registration between October 1 and December 31 to be current through the following calendar year. Thank you.
Thank you again. And now we have a question that came in for Laurie Simonds. If a company A acquired company B along with their labeler code, can company A maintain both the labeler codes?
That is a great question. So yes, a merger or acquisition, as we mentioned before, is a reason why a company might be assigned more than one labeler code. So if the labeler code is transferred to company A as part of that merger, then the labeler code information would need to be updated in order to refer to the proper company after that merger. Thank you.
Thank you for that response as well. We have a question now for Dr. Tasneem Hussain. Do CMO foreign establishments and applicant holder both have to submit drug product listings separately?
Yes, thanks for that question. So as far as application holders, they're not performing any manufacturing activities. They're just the application holder. So in that case, they're not required to register or list. CMO, however, must register and must submit drug product listings for all their products that they manufacture. So basically, as been mentioned before, CMOs are ultimately responsible to make sure that there are 2 listing files submitted for each product that has been manufactured. So one must be under the CMO's name and NDC, and one must be under the PLD's, the private label distributor who's actually distributing the products in the PLD's name and NDC. So as we mentioned before earlier, also CMO is ultimately responsible, but the PLD may choose if they want to submit their own listing. So yes, 2 listings have to be submitted and the CMO is responsible, but an applicant holder who doesn't perform any activities, any manufacturing activities, are not required to register or list. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. Now we have a question back to Regie Samuel. Could you please define repack and relabel? Does it include bundling 2 existing products into, for example, a twin pack? Does it include adding an existing product to a kit or holiday pack, or are these considered labeling?
Great question. And I'm going to try to do this concisely. And as mentioned before, if there are questions we don't get to and I can't necessarily answer it fully, please do send us an email to our email address so we can address your concerns. When it comes to repack and relabel and label and pack and label, this is the way to think about it. For repack and relabel, these are the business operations you would use when your firm is taking another product and then putting your name and label on it and distributing that drug product. So for example, a repackager would be a firm that takes some product, puts it into its own packaging with its own labeling, and then is distributing that product under their own name and label, meaning their own labeler code. A repack or relabel would be when you're simply keeping something, a already distributed drug product and simply changing the labeling to your labeling and distributing that drug product. PAC is the one you would use when you're being contracted to package a certain drug product into a carton or into a bottle, but it's not being distributed under your own name and label. You're being contracted to just do the packaging portion. Then you would select PAC. Similarly for label, if you're not distributing the drug product under your own label, you're a contract labeler, you would select label for when you're simply putting another person's label for them and returning it back to them. So those things can be a little confusing, and we understand that. We're here to help you whenever we can. But if you're actually assembling things together from the outset, that is more a manufacturing activity. It's not a repackaging. Repackaging would be if you're taking another product that's already distributed and putting it into your own packaging. So specific questions, please do email us, and we will be able to help you that way. Thank you.
Thank you again, Reggie. We have another question for you. If a company has multiple establishments registered under different subsidiaries owned by the same parent company, and they want to migrate these establishment registrations into FDA Direct, do the establishments need to be set up so they all share the same registrant, i.e., parent organization?
Yes, this is a great question because I know there are times when firms have previously unknowingly submitted multiple establishment registrations under multiple set IDs, and now they want to manage all of those establishments under one set ID. Yes, all of those establishments will then need to share the same registrant DUNS, because in the establishment registration, as I showed you, there's only one field for registrant DUNS. And as such, each of those establishments that you now put into the establishment registration have to share the same registrant DUNS. You may run into an error or two because you may get the error that this establishment DUNS is associated with a different registrant ID. Email us and we can help you fix that error in order for you to be able to more easily manage your establishment registrations under one establishment registration, SPL. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again so much for that information. And this concludes the 30 minutes we had scheduled or allotted for Q&A with this session, but please be aware there will be another Q&A at the end of the day. So thank you again to our presenters for all the excellent information and insights. Right now, we'll be taking a lunch break to resume at the scheduled time on the agenda, that is 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So everyone, please enjoy the break.